Wonderful. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you for Farm Bureau members being here today. We are so happy to have you here on our bi-monthly seminars. Welcome to our presentation on the fire prevention and fire safety from our very own Napa County Fire Team. Napa County Farm Bureau is proud to offer these member benefits and hope that this information can help you out on your farm or ranch. For more information after this seminar, please contact the Farm Bureau at 707-224-5403. Please note this seminar is being recorded. First up, I would like to welcome David Shrew, Napa County Fire Administrator, on the future of wildfire in Napa County. David Shrew currently serves as the Napa County Fire Administrator and has been in the position since October 30th, 2023. In addition to a few pragmatic responsibilities such as oversight of budgets, contracts, and Napa County Fire Marshal's Office, and providing oversight for fire prevention grants, the overarching goal of the Fire Administration is to work with all entities to create a more fire-resilient future for Napa County. Dave retired from CAL FIRE in 2018 as a staff chief for planning and risk analysis under the California State Fire Marshal. He also practiced as a licensed architect prior to his firefighting career, which provides him with a unique perspective of wildfire impacts on our built environment. After his CAL FIRE retirement, he established a consulting company focused on wildfire risk analysis until accepting his current position. He has lived in Napa for 25 years with his family and is passionate to help resolve our local wildfire challenges. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Christine. I appreciate it. And if my share screen button here we go. Hang on a second. Okay, is that fully on the screen now? Are you seeing my first slide there? No? Christina, I have a number 2 block up in the left-hand corner. Does that mean anything? Or going to get going here in just a second. Hang on a moment. So click and then hit share. I'll start the presentation. Where am I at? No,
start.
Okay,
sure. No, you're good. Sure.
Okay.
Just start the presentation on your PowerPoint.
Go here. There we go. I think I'm on now. Is that correct? Okay, thank you. I'll get going here. So, yeah, what I want to talk to you about today, and I hope this isn't a repeat to too many of you or anything, but I'm going to talk about some big, broad pictures about wildfire impacts and prevention projects that actually work. Because I think what happens is we get really wrapped up in looking at the devastation of wildfires and the impacts of wildfires. What I'm going to start focusing on is kind of tying it into some big pictures to show that prevention projects and doing the right things actually do work. And we've got examples of those from all over the world. And my job and what I'm going to try to do is to work with everybody in the county to find out how we can incorporate those success models here in Napa County to try to make the impacts less impactful. So what I'm going to start with is we all I bet a lot of you saw this. This is from the town of Lahaina in Maui. And a lot of people, this photograph of this house, the red roof house, as they called it, or a lot of people deemed it the miracle house of Lahaina that somehow survived this horrible devastation. And the real simply, answer to this is that there is absolutely nothing miraculous about this house whatsoever. The house happened to be an older home that Some people had bought a couple of years ago, and they spent a couple of years rebuilding it. Essentially, they did different siding. You can see they have a good metal roof on. They had redone their landscaping. If you really dive into it, you can see sort of a rock perimeter around the base of the house, which they did to prevent termite damage. They didn't do it for fire protection, but it did serve as a fire protection barrier. And so these things that people did actually became the components that allowed that house to survive. So it's not a miracle. It's just that all the right things took place. The same thing happened in Chile just this past February, just a few months ago. Chile actually experienced the worst wildfire storms that they have ever seen in their entire life. And so what ended up happening is that in Villa del Mar, Chile, in South America, they had these horrible fires. But what ended up happening is this one neighborhood that has about 90 homes in it completely survived intact in the face of these large, devastating wildfires that were burning up these hillsides. And there's a lot of researchers from around the world that flew down there actually to really take a look at these homes and this subdivision to try to find out, why did these homes survive? What were the actions that the people took there, both before, during, and after the fires, that allowed this community to survive? Again, we want to learn those lessons and bring them back here to start finding out those same results. Likewise, in late February, many of you may recall that there was one of the largest wildfires in Texas history. It actually started up in Oklahoma. The Windy Deuce fire that burned down into Texas, over 1 million acres were burned. But there was one town called Borger, Texas, that is actually a Firewise community. They've been a member of Firewise for many years, and they had actually done some fire prevention burning of some prescribed fires along the perimeter of their city, knowing that it is a tool that can help protect them in the event of a large fire coming. And when the fires in February started, it did exactly what it was designed to do. So again, an entire community that became aware of their risk of fire and took actions to try to prevent these things. It actually turned out working, to work very well. And this is a local example that I'm going to show you. This is an actual property. It's in Sonoma County, but as you can see, it was in the path of the glass fire as it was burning from Napa to Sonoma County. And you can see that this property owner had gone to great lengths. You can see sort of that clear area. I don't know if you can see my cursor, but right there in the center of the property, you had this area that was untouched with a big stand of green trees, because as the fire was burning through, it began to encounter this landscape that this landowner had treated. In other words, they had spent a lot of time taking vegetation off the landscape. They thinned the trees and the vegetation and the brush. And so the fire really ran out of a lot of fuel to burn, and it simply burned around the area that they had treated. And then once it got past the area that the landowners had treated, it just came back together on the far side of that green stand of trees and continued burning to Santa Rosa. So even here locally, we see examples of fire treatments and work that actually have, been successful in keeping fires from being so devastating. So how do we translate all of these things into some simple components? I'm going to talk about today, not about the large landscaping scale, vegetation treatments across the landscape, but more onto individual properties with structures. And what I can boil this down to is a term that has come up by, you can see the source for this diagram is NIST, the National Institute for Standards and Technology, who have been working very, very hard with CAL FIRE and other research agencies around the world to be able to create this simple sort of tool. What I want each one of you to take away from this is to really look at thinking of these two knobs, if you will, by looking at the fact that there are a red knob and a blue knob, one talking about reducing exposures around your structure and the other about hardening that structure. And in every single case, every one of you can go out and look around your properties, around your homes, your businesses, your buildings on your property, and you can really look and see how those dials can be turned and adjusted. Do you need more exposure in some, or to reduce exposure more in some areas than others? Do you have structures that are less hardened that you need to put more effort into? So in every case, you can decide what level of exposure needs to be treated and how to reduce that exposure so that when a wildfire comes through your property, you can establish the correct amount of exposure that reduces the likelihood of embers, direct flame, and radiant heat from impacting and igniting your structure. And likewise, you can adjust the materials, the details, the joints, the vents, all of the features around your structure that can be hardened so that when those fires burn through, your home or business or a building can withstand the impacts of heat, flame, and embers. And so the diagram at right is actually studied experiences by NIST looking at the way flames progress or the way fire progresses and how it reaches structures to burn things down. And a lot of things that we find is that vegetation is too close and the heat or the flames from that vegetation may start the catch the building on fire. There may be a wooden fence that catches on fire, and then that wooden fence acts as nothing more than a candle wick that takes the fire straight to the building and then ignites the building. Or it may go from one structure to another. There's lots of different paths that a fire can take. And again, your decisions can simply go out and look around your property and try to determine how will a fire find a path to reach my structure. And because I've either not taken the efforts to reduce the exposures or harden the structure will then catch fire and burn down. So what efforts and tactics do you need to employ to go ahead and change that exposure and hardening of your structure to reduce that ignition potential? These are all things that every one of us can do. Now, a couple of months ago, I went ahead and gave a presentation to the Board of Supervisors. It was on May 7th in 2024. And what I did is I created one of the things that they asked me to do when I first came on was to really look far into the future. Because of all the impacts that we've suffered from here in Napa County, how do we create a future with a more resilient fire environment so that as fires continue to occur, and by all accounts will continue to get worse than what we've seen before in the past, how do we survive those worsening fire impacts? So what I did is I gave the presentation to the board about a 30-year future of really looking down the road and envisioning what a new fire 30 years from now might look like, and what are the actionable elements that can take place to try to prevent structures from burning in the future. What I came up with is largely taken out of a program that has been created by the National Fire Protection Association called Outthink Wildfire. And Outthink Wildfire was created by NFPA to be a 30-year plan to eliminate the destruction of our communities through wildfires within 30 years. And the Outthink Wildfire campaign is based upon 5 tenets. And I'll just go through these one by one, requiring all homes and businesses in the wildland-urban interface, or the WUI, to be ignition resistant. Number 2 is to current codes and standards, as well as sound land use practices, must be in use and enforced. Number 3 is that fire departments for communities in the wildland-urban interface must be prepared to respond safely and effectively to wildfires. Number 4 is that governments should increase resources for vegetation fuel management. And finally, the public must understand their role and take action in reducing wildfire risk. Every one of these 5 initiatives are either already started or well down the road here in Napa County. So we're not starting from ground zero. We actually have gone a long way towards encouraging people and looking at homes and businesses to be fire ignition resistant. We've adopted local codes and ordinances that are trying to help employ those visions of how things will go. And as we move forward in time, we'll get better at that. We've also got a very strong and robust fire department through our combination department with both paid and volunteer members that have a very good track record of responding and helping the public. And our government, this year alone, Napa County has gone through an historic investment of over $20 million that they're investing just this year alone in helping with fire prevention projects, which is augmented by federal funding through our BRIC grant, the Building Resilience and for Infrastructure and Communities grant that we are now beginning to use. And then also, one of the biggest components is the public has to understand and embrace these tactics and strategies and understand their roles and responsibilities by choosing to live in a wildfire environment, and how all of these features can become can create a more resilient future. So it begs the question, are we willing to embrace these things and do something different instead of the same thing over and over? We see a lot of homes being rebuilt with fire-prone materials that can burn again in the future. Is that really the smart way to go? Or should we look and envision building with new construction materials, methods, and practices that actually resist ember intrusion and ignition, as well as being energy efficient, and looking at the guidelines sponsored by the FireWise USA program, wildfire prepared home standards from the Insurance Institute for Business and Home Safety through IBHS, and other resources. I guess the joke is that we could just build our retracto dome and have everything protected at the end of the day. So when a fire comes, we just close it all up. The reality is we could actually do something similar to that. But I think, in reality, we need to kind of think about how to put that into service. And then together, I guess I want to stress the importance of the fact that we know how to do this. Together, we can choose to build a more fire resilient future for the county, and we know how to make that work. So I want to go ahead and end it with that. And Christina, do you want to offer any questions now or wait till the end, or how would you like to do this?
Thank you so much, David. We'll go ahead and wait till the end. And
okay.
Thank you. That was wonderful.
And I will stop sharing my screen. Okay.
Next, I would like to welcome Jason Downs, Fire Marshal for the County of Napa. Jason will be presenting on how the farming community can prepare. Jason Downs has served 16 years as a CAL FIRE firefighter. He had the privilege of serving numerous communities in many challenging and rewarding roles. Beginning his journey as a firefighter paramedic, he quickly developed a deep respect for the profession's demands and importance of swift, effective response in critical situations. In 2020, he transitioned to the Napa County Fire Marshal's office, where his focus shifted to prevention, safety education, and ensuring compliance with fire safety regulations. In 2023, Jason was honored to begin serving as the Napa County Fire Marshal. This role has enabled him to utilize his extensive operational experience to enhance safety protocols and cultivate a culture of preparedness within our community. He is committed to upholding the highest standards of firefighting excellence and public safety. He is passionate about his work and dedicated to making a positive impact through proactive fire prevention strategies and responsive emergency management. Thank you, Jason.
All right, thank you. Let me go ahead and get my screen shared here and get my PowerPoint going. I'm used to Teams as well, so I might struggle like Dave did here a little bit. Okay, can we see that, everyone? Can you guys, nope. Bear with me one second here. I'm trying to figure out how to get the PowerPoint.
My side.
What was that? I've got it up, you guys, but it's not showing, correct?
We can see your screen with your preview of next slide also.
Oh, got it. Okay, so you can see that. Okay. Not sure what button to push here.
Finally made it. I finally made it over here.
We can see it pretty well, Jason. I said probably just go for it.
Okay. Yeah, I got the split. I got dual screens here, so it's coming up on my right screen is what I want to show you guys. But anyways, okay. Well, we'll just go with this. Yeah, thank you for the introduction. This slide right here just sort of goes over that. Then one thing to add, I've lived here locally since 2016. And the next thing I wanted to go over is just a little bit of the organizational structure of the Fire Marshal's office. We've recently done some growth in our office, and we're expanding. And so it's really important for everyone to sort of understand sort of the many hats and the many roles that we have. So as the fire marshal, we're responsible for reviewing all new construction and development. So you'll see that on the left side of my organizational chart here. We have a couple plans examiners, and we have a deputy fire marshal who is responsible for all of the construction inspections and compliance inspections. And then we have sort of the right side of that organizational chart. And on that right side is everything that has to do with defensible space and our work and our collaboration with our partners in CAL FIRE, our local engine companies, Napa County Firewise Foundation, and all the fire safe councils. And they also serve as the community education, community PIO. And then we have seasonal 4 this year. We've gone from 2 to 4 what we call seasonal defensible space inspectors, and we assign those inspectors to go out every day to go and inspect various communities to ensure compliance with our defensible space ordinance, our local county ordinance. So we wear a lot of different hats, and so it's good to know what we cover, so that if you have any questions or need help or assistance in any way, you know what our office is capable of providing. So today's topic, is just wildfire preparedness for farms, ranches, and ag operations. And what I want to do is I want to give credit to the University of California Agricultural and Natural Resources Fire Network. I've got the link below. Dave shared this with me. And so a lot of this information, they have a fantastic website. You can go find a lot of this great content on that website. directly. But what I've done is I've gone ahead and extracted a lot of it so we can kind of easily understand, how we can apply the defensible space requirements and the fire resistive requirements to, sort of the farming operation, which is so much of our valley. So first of all, we got to understand, and Dave touched on this a little bit, is just sort of what are the contributing factors to homes burning down? And to understand that, it's really important to go back to the basics of fire, something that's taught in your basic fire class at any college level, and that's the fire triangle. It takes three components, an oxidizer, heat, fuel, which in wildland fire, that's going to be all of the dry vegetation. And then, of course, in the center, those three things create a chemical reaction, which results in fire. And then we also want to know is how does the fire actually spread? And there's three main driving components there. And the three significant factors are going to be topography, weather, and fuel. And topography and weather, we cannot change or control those. But the fuel load and the fuel modeling is something that we can. And that's what's so critical about maintaining your properties and your ranches, your farms, and your vineyards. So the next thing is we want to know is, how do structures actually burn? Now we know how fire starts. Now we know how the fire actually moves. The other thing we want to know is, how do these structures actually burn? And there's three things that sort of contribute to structures burning. One, obviously, direct flame contact. A fire front, as it moves through the area, if it's heavily vegetated all the way up to the edge of a structure, if you have overhanging tree branches, vegetation growing right up to the edge or the sides of these structures, of course, direct flame impact on a structure is going to be a contributing factor. But oftentimes that's not the case. And so people often scratch their heads and go, wait a minute, I've got clearance. How did my structure burn? Well, we know that major fires, uncontrollable fires, are usually wind-driven fires. And so embers can carry up to several miles sometimes, depending on the size of those embers. And then they can land and they can find themselves on top of structures, on roofs, in gutters, in wood piles, flammable materials like Dave alluded to, fences and other things that are extremely dry and easily ignitable. And then that can cause the structure to then begin burning as a result of embers landing or penetrating the structure, whether it be a vented attic space or crawl space. The other thing, that is sometimes a surprise to folks is the radiant heat. And when we talk about the volume of some of the fuel that is burning, the amount of radiant heat that is coming off that fire, even if we don't have embers or direct flame impact, the amount of radiant heat can be so significant that it can break glass or just bring a certain material. If it's a dry wood product or something like that, can potentially bring it up to its ignition temperature. And so the radiant heat is also another contributing factor. So with the basic understanding there of weather, topography, fuel, how fires move, what some of the contributing factors to homes burning, where do we really start here? And we have a couple different tiles here. First of all, is just understand, are you in a fire risk area? If you're on the valley floor and you're surrounded by vineyards, we've seen the fire jump the valley in the 2020 glass fires. So of course you need to take precaution. But if you're up in the hills, you certainly are. And one of the things would be looking at our fire risk maps. They're available through the CAL FIRE website. You can just look at that online. You can Google your address and it'll take you right there and tell you what fire hazard severity zone you're in. You can also begin to prepare your home through the various home hardening and defensible space recommendations that we make or recommend. Other important things that kind of get overlooked is know your evacuation routes. Hopefully you have at least 2 routes to escape if one of those routes is cut off. You know, and then of course the intent of today's topic is just sort of preparing your vineyards, your ranches, your farms, and then also working together as a community. You know, what we've seen here is a really great collective effort amongst all of the you know, the Farm Bureau, the vintners, the grape growers, you know, all the various fire-wise or fire safe councils, I should say. You know, those are really just communities getting together and identifying the hazards that exist within their communities and doing something about it. So that's fantastic. So let's get into a little bit more of the details here. And right here, you see a picture of a typical ag barn, something that is all over this county. And to on the left side, you can kind of see something that's a property or a building that's not really well prepared or maintained. You see a lot of vegetation and growth up against the structure. You see a lot of combustible materials leaned up or stored next to the structure. You see things like pine needles or leaves on top of the structure. And so the picture to the left obviously depicts something you know, a little bit different. The vegetation around that structure is managed. The combustible materials have been removed, and the combustible materials on the roof and in the gutters have also been removed. That is makes the home or the structure itself a little bit more fire resistive. So that's a fantastic sort of example there of some simple things that really doesn't require much, just requires a little bit of manual labor to, you know, properly prepare that defensible space and make that structure more fire resistive. The next thing you see is defensible space for farms or ranches. You know, the definition or my text here sort of describes exactly what defensible space is. I won't read it for you. I'm sure a lot of you have a fantastic understanding of what defensible space is, but you can again see in the picture below a barn and what appears to be, you know, home, you know, where it's not really there's not a lot of defensible space. There's real no preparation there on that site. But the picture to the right, what you see is you see a little bit of thinning around the structures, and you see various zones. The 0 to 5 foot zone, which is we call zone 0, which is a non-combustible material. We don't things like we don't recommend things like bark or flammable vegetation up against structures. We recommend hardscape, whether it be concrete, pavers, some kind of a rock. And then, you know, in that 5 to 30 foot zone, you've got all your annual grasses and brush cut back to 4 inches or less. Your trees are limbed up to eliminate what we call ladder fuels, and anything that's dead or dying is removed. And then you see in that 30-foot plus range as well, those trees are limbed up, ladder fuels are removed, anything dead or dying has been removed. And you also can create from that 30 to 100 foot, you can create that defensible space by cutting down those annual grasses and brushes as well. And that's all compliant with the CAL FIRE recommendations for defensible space, and it's also compliant with our local ordinance for defensible space. And here, this just goes into a little bit more detail. And we just sort of went over you know, visually what that looks like, but here it really sort of breaks down on recommended actions that you can take in each zone, removing vegetation, how to landscape, and what to do in each of those areas. Next, I'll go ahead and linger on this for a quick second so you all have a chance to kind of look at it. One of the things that's you know, as farmers, grazing is really an effective way to eliminate a lot of fuel. And I know that's something that's being done all over the county here. And so something that is really sort of an effective method to reduce your fuel load. Next, fire protection for crops, vineyards, and orchards. So in here, it sort of discusses how a well, sort of managed vineyard or orchard, typically they act as really good fire breaks. When we've seen that in effect here in this county. Slope has a definite impact. We have seen several vineyards that were completely damaged, but those were on very, very steep slopes. But in general, vineyards do act as good fuel breaks. However, one of the things that we highly, highly recommend, if we go back to the beginning of my presentation where we talk about contributing factors, we talk about radiant heat or direct flame impact. And, on a lot of these vineyards, there are vineyard access roads, which can be used by our fire engines and fire apparatus to access different points of the fire. So it's important to maintain those roads to where they're drivable, by one of our type 3 or wildland fire engines or a pickup truck. But it's also important to create that defensible space around those vineyards. And the reason why is direct flame impact or radiant heat, that will lessen the impact on those outside roads. And, as I'm sure you're all very well aware, minimizing the damage or the impact to the vineyards and to the orchards is just as important, to the folks in this valley as is protecting the structures, because that's the moneymaker. And so we really recommend that. And it also sort of increases the width of that fuel break, not just looking at the vineyard, but if we create that defensible space around the vineyards as well, that's going to do a really good job at sort of protecting those vital vineyards and orchards we have here in the county. So areas to consider: roads, fence lines, equipment areas, critical infrastructure to your winery, areas where you have wells, generators, fuel tanks. All of these things that can sort of contributing to the increase of a fire or the further spreading of a fire. These are all things that you want to consider as well, not just the structures themselves. All right. The next thing is what can you do before the fire? So we've talked a little bit about some of the things you can do to make your structures more resistant, or your critical infrastructure, and also the vines and the vineyards. But here's some really good points that I'd like to touch on as well, and that's create and update emergency plan. If you're leading a group of workers out there in your vineyard or on your farm, ranch, have a plan. In the event of a fire, make sure that you can maintain accountability for everyone that is on property, and make sure that, in the event of a fire, that there's a meeting point. They come back to all hands are accounted for, and then have a decision-making process in place on how everyone's gonna safely evacuate. Make sure that you're hooked up with our local alerts through our Office of Emergency Services, and make sure that if possible, I know it's not possible in all areas of the county, but if possible, that you're staying tuned and are aware of any sort of emergency alerts that might get sent out. The next thing is apply for the local the ag pass. I'll have to defer on that. I'm not exactly quite sure where we're at. I know there's been a lot of discussion about, that. And there's also a lot of discussion with local wineries about, having folks stay behind and defend properties. And there's a lot of different things like that going on. Our recommendation is always going to be to evacuate if you're told to evacuate. But we understand that people might make the decision to stay behind. So we understand is just know what that risk is and know what you're asking others to do and avoid any unnecessary danger. Of course, obvious things just like in a regular fire, make sure anything that's critical, make sure it's backed up digitally or stored securely. Harden your structure, which we've gone over on some great ways that you can do that to harden your structure, maintain defensible space, and then this was something they had there. What I'd like to maybe expand on that. There's a lot of great, vintners out there that are going above and beyond. Some of which, Chapelet, for example, they've got these really expansive trailers with sprinklers and hoses and stuff like that they can deploy, and they can utilize the irrigation network throughout all their vineyards to deploy this and sort of assist in providing that defensible space or creating areas where they can sort of protect their vineyards and their critical infrastructure. We've seen a lot of other wineries as well sort of employ similar tactics. Something as simple as just having a firebox with some wildland hose that's staged next to the hydrant on their property and make that available for the use of responding firefighters. So a lot of great things that you can do and learn from others in the valley and what they're currently doing. And then just sort of in closing, what I'd like to do is just point you to our website. We've recently updated it. And you can see here, we've got a lot of great access. If you just simply Googled Napa County Fire Marshal's Office, we've got a lot of great information in here. In regards to defensible space, we have all of our local ordinances. We've got our guidelines up there. And then we also, I'd like to point out, if you guys aren't aware, that we run a chipping program. The chipping program is available to anyone in Napa County. It's a free program. We run 2 chippers, generally get them going from May. I think we started this year, and we're going to run until until there's no more requests or until the significant rain occurs. But you do the trimming and get the piles lined up, and then we'll come out and chip it. So it's a fantastic resource that's available for all residents in Napa County. And then last but not least, I'd also like to point out is that we do provide a consulting program as well. So if you have questions about your property and because each property is unique and has specific needs. And so we can go out, we're happy to go out, sort of provide you with some best practices, some recommendations, and a scope of work. We're also working on updating our list of recommended contractors. We can't, as a government entity, say, hey, hire this guy or that guy. But we do have a handful of contractors that we've educated on our local defensible space ordinance, the defensible space requirements, and what we like to see. And they have demonstrated that their work reflects what we're asking folks to do. And so we can provide a recommended list. So happy to get that set up. Feel free to call our office and we can have further discussion. So with that, thank you for your guys' time today. Hopefully this was beneficial, and be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Jason. Next, welcome J.R. Rogers, Project Manager for the Napa County Fire Administration. J.R. will be hosting an open question and answer session for the audience. J.R. Rogers is a multifaceted professional serving as the project manager for the newly created Napa County Fire Administration, where he coordinates fuel reduction projects, grant oversight, and general budget oversight. With extensive experience as volunteer fire captain and firefighter paramedic, JR brings hands-on expertise and a deep understanding of emergency response to his role. He brings his administrative and management background from the higher education community, serving in recruitment, student life, and most recently as the Associate Vice President for Student Life at Pacific Union College. His diverse background and dedication make him an invaluable asset in enhancing fire safety and community resilience in Napa County. We are so thankful to have him here today to take your questions. At this time, I will open up the floor for any questions, and please feel free to type them in on the chat if you would like to not speak out, but feel free to go ahead.
Yeah, and thank you for the time. I don't have a presentation. I just get to facilitate the Q&A. So as she mentioned, throw them in the chat, or if down on the bottom there's the react button, there's a little heart there and you want to raise your hand, feel free to do that. And then I can kind of call out and see if there's any questions for either Dave or Jason. But while folks are kind of thinking about that, I'm going to just sort of zing one out there. Jason, to you, you talked a little bit about the defensible space ordinance. I was wondering if you could, spend maybe 2 minutes kind of expanding on maybe a little of the nuts and bolts of the D-space ordinance that the county has specifically.
Yeah, sure. That's fantastic. So in general, the state recommends 100 feet of defensible space. And so our defensible space goes a step further than that. And we say that all structures in Napa County are entitled to 100 feet of defensible space. So where that really comes into play is on some of these smaller lots, where if you have, let's say, 60 feet from your structure to your property line, well, then your neighbor would be responsible to give you that additional 40. And so that is unique to Napa County, and that's outlined in our ordinance. And so that everyone can be entitled to that minimum 100 feet. Now, of course, that's the bare minimum. That 100 feet is intended really on sort of relatively flat ground. Once you start getting in any sort of a slope, the steeper that slope gets, the greater that distance really needs to be. But with that being said, we always recommend is go to our website, look at that recommendation, look at those guidelines, educate yourself, educate your neighbors, start with that, good neighborly approach. And I think in what we've seen on most cases, I would say probably 95% of the cases, is we have all either been directly or indirectly impacted by the fires in this county if you've lived in this county since 2020 or 17. And so everyone is hyper aware of the dangers that exist. And there's a really just good grassroots community effort in all the communities to sort of work together and to solve this problem and go beyond sort of this minimum requirement. But should you run into issues with a neighbor that is unwilling to do that work for you, should you fall into that category, feel free to reach out to our office, and we have various compliance and enforcement mechanisms where we can take it a step further to ensure that you have the appropriate amount of D space.
Awesome. Thank you, sir. I don't see any other questions yet, but boy, did I come loaded to get us all the way to 57. So Dave, we're going to keep running down the D-space lane here, and I know we've heard a lot about Zone 0 that's been out there. We don't necessarily have an ordinance or anything from the state yet, but I'm wondering if you might expand on that.
Sure. And so for anybody out there that doesn't understand what Zone 0 means, that means that that is a term that has been used to describe a zone that, think of it as a little moat that rolls around the perimeter of your structure. So what we have discovered, because we've had so many big fires for so many years here now, one of the recognitions that has been proven on both actual fires as well as testing in the laboratories, it has become painfully clear that any kind of combustible materials that exists on the ground within 5 feet of where a building meets the ground has a significant increase of igniting that material and then consequently igniting the structure. We've seen that with countless tens of thousands of structures all over the state. What we also know is that if you clean that combustible material away from the structure, so think of landscaping. If there was no landscaping right adjacent to the house, and instead of having your bushes pushed right up against your house, they were 5 feet away, so that, think about it, you could actually see them better out of your window instead of them being right under your window. But if the landscaping was cleared out and there was nothing combustible there and a non-combustible surface of rock or paving or tile or any kind of non-combustible surface, it could act as a barrier so that when the embers start swirling around in those winds at the base of that structure, there simply is nothing there to ignite the structure. And we have seen that be a success story and a major contributor to reducing the number of structures that hit around the globe. And so we know today that in and of itself, if you did nothing more than remove flammable materials of any kind away from the base of a structure, that simple step alone can reduce the risk of your structure igniting during wildfires. So we're calling that zone today Zone 0, because it's sort of like, think of ground zero. It is the basis of what you can start doing around your structure to eliminate the possibility of ignition during a wildfire.
Awesome. I'm going to send one more question over to you, actually, Dave, and actually kind of similar in that vein. We've talked a little about landscaping in Zone 0, but let's take a sidestep into kind of the home hardening aspect and what are some really simple things folks can do to protect their home, or in this case, their business, or just a general structure, from a fire that's maybe coming against their building.
Yeah, so that's a really, simple step that a lot of people can take. One of the simple steps, you kind of want to know, well, where are the most vulnerable areas of my structure that I need to protect? And one simple step that I've told people, and I've mentioned this in conferences and talks that I've given all over the place, and I'll say it again here, because on occasions, we get some really windy days out there. We all know it. The wind is blowing. And on those windy days, here's what you do. You simply grab your cup of coffee or whatever, and you start walking around your structure. And you've all seen it before without paying a lot of attention to it. But when you have areas in the corners of your buildings on a deck or up on a roof or something like that, and you've all seen this before, where the wind's blowing and you see little whirlwinds of leaves and debris and litter just floating around in those corners and around the base of your structure and things like that. You want to pay really close attention to those areas where you're watching the wind blow all that dirt and leaves and litter around in those corners, because when a fire hits with a high wind factor involved, the embers that are being generated by that fire are going to be blowing around and circulating in those exact same areas. So you want to pay really, really close attention to those areas where you see the debris blowing around in the wind, and look at where embers, and picture those leaves and debris as being embers. And then think about the fact that if there's lots of those, thousands, if not millions of these embers blowing around in that little corner, where could those embers find to ignite your structure? And if you've got a gap in the corner where there's a little gap maybe between where the wood comes together or where the deck hits the wall and things like that, you want to pay attention to those, because the embers will find those little cracks and crevices and find those nooks and crannies to go ahead and embed themselves. And enough of those embers with enough wind and heat behind it will ignite your structure. But by taking care of sealing those off with extra trim, with maybe caulking, or doing something to eliminate the embers, the opportunity to find that nook or cranny to go into, then they can't get there. And you've just taken away the opportunity for the embers to find that ignition point around your structure. Another key example is just your vents. You want to make sure that you've got a vent mesh that is a minimum of 1/8 inch or smaller, that will prevent embers from going into your crawl spaces and up into your eaves, into your attics and things like that. So make sure that your vents have the right screen and mesh that will help protect from that ember intrusion. And certainly, of course, make sure that as you're walking around your structure, envision every piece of vegetation around there on fire. Is it far enough away that the burning bush or tree will not be able to ignite your home from either the flames or the radiant heat? Those are the questions you can ask yourself. And then just look at the condition overall of your structure. Is your siding, are your windows, is your trim, all of these features, are they in good condition that would allow embers to just bombard it, but then bounce off and have no impact? So those are some of the simple steps that you can take. There's even more, but you can go on to the website that Jason mentioned, and CAL FIRE's website, and our fire marshal website has links to wildfire prepared home that you can have and things like this. So there's a lot of resources that you can go find to find out even more information. And of course, I could talk for an entire day just on that one topic alone, but I won't do that. I'll turn it back over to JR.
You can answer the question in the chat about. You want to answer the question in the chat about the mulch?
Sure.
And that'll be our last one.
So that sounds wonderful. We have one last question: mulch or no mulch, alternatives for the garden. Does anybody want to take that real quickly?
Yeah, I'll take it.
Okay.
So mulch is just fine as long as it's not up against your structure. I mean, mulch has a lot of beneficial purposes. It maintains moisture. It helps retard weeds. There's a lot of good factors about mulch, but you don't want it against your structure, because mulch is a lot of kindling that will ignite very, very easily in these fire situations. And you want it to be at a very minimum, no wood mulch, a minimum of 5 feet away from your structure. As long as it's 5 feet or more away from your structure, you can use mulch. And so don't prohibit yourself from using it when it's further away from the structure, but certainly not up against the house itself.
Well, thank you so much to all of our speakers here today, Jason, David, and JR. You are just wonderful, and we so appreciate your expertise and sharing it with us today, and our Napa Farm Bureau members. Thank you to our Napa Farm Bureau members for being here, and thank you for supporting agriculture. If there's any other information you all would like, please call our office. We can get you in touch with the Fire Administration Department. Have a wonderful day. Thank you.